Welcome to Furniture Industry News. Today is March 24th, 2026. Thanks for taking a few minutes to stay up to date on what's happening across our industry. We'll start today with a story that highlights just how unpredictable global trade policy has become and how real the financial impact is for companies in our space. The rug segment is still working through the fallout from a rapid tariff cycle tied to imports from India. After a U.S. Supreme Court decision struck down tariffs that had been imposed under emergency economic powers, several importers, including companies like Jaipur Living and Rugs America, are now taking legal action to recover the money they paid. And this wasn't a small issue. During a 5-month window last year, tariffs on Indian goods climbed as high as 50%. That created immediate disruption in one of the most important sourcing regions for rugs. In fact, exports from India to the U.S. dropped sharply during that stretch, falling by more than a third between May and September. Even though the tariffs have since been reduced, dropping from 50% down to 18%, with expectations they may settle somewhere between 10 and 15%, the damage to planning and confidence is still being felt. The Supreme Court ruling didn't automatically trigger refunds, which is why companies are now in court trying to recover millions of dollars. In the meantime, retailers and manufacturers have had to make tough decisions. Some absorbed the higher costs to protect customer relationships. Others passed those costs along or delayed shipments altogether. What this situation really underscores is how difficult it's become to plan inventory, pricing, and long-term investments when policy can shift that quickly. And while India remains a critical partner, especially for handcrafted rugs where there are few true domestic alternatives, the experience has pushed many companies to rethink their sourcing strategies. We're seeing a broader move toward diversification, not necessarily abandoning key regions, but building more flexibility into supply chains so companies aren't as exposed when policy changes hit. From there, let's shift into product, because as we get closer to high point market, early introductions are starting to give us a sense of where design is heading. One of the biggest takeaways from pre-market is that we're not seeing a lot of reinvention, but we are seeing thoughtful reinterpretation. Across upholstery and case goods, there's a clear trend towards softer, more relaxed versions of traditional forms. Think sweeping curves, flared legs, and silhouettes that feel familiar but less rigid. It's a move toward comfort and approachability without losing that sense of structure. There's also a strong emphasis on mixing materials. Stone, metal, leather, and wood are being combined in ways that create a more layered, collected look. Some of these pieces feel loosely inspired by past eras, with comparisons being made to more organic, material-driven design approaches. At the same time, pre-market wasn't just about aesthetics. It also served as a testing ground for sourcing and category expansion. For example, one supplier is leaning into solid wood bedroom collections coming out of Bangladesh. Others are expanding into modular seating, mixed media collections, and whole home assortments designed to help retailers merchandise more cohesively across categories. And interestingly, traditional styling is still resonating. Several vendors reported strong early response to updated classic looks. So, while consumers are open to new ideas, they're still gravitating toward designs that feel familiar just with updated details and better functionality. Attendance at pre-market may have been lighter than usual, but it still played an important role for vendors refining their assortments ahead of the April market. Now, staying on the topic of sourcing, the mattress category is dealing with its own set of challenges, and in many ways, it mirrors what we're seeing in rugs just over a longer period of time. Since 2018, a series of anti-dumping cases targeting low-cost imports has reshaped where mattresses are produced. It started with China, then expanded to other countries, and each time duties were applied, production shifted somewhere else. That's created a kind of ongoing cycle, where sourcing strategies are constantly being adjusted to keep up with trade enforcement. More recently, regulators have started investigating whether some imports are trying to get around existing duties, adding even more complexity. At the same time, there are growing concerns about compliance, especially with ultra-low-priced products coming through e-commerce channels that may not meet federal safety standards. Despite all of that, imports still make up a meaningful share of the market. But both volume and value declined last year, driven by pricing changes and softer demand. One notable shift is a renewed focus on domestic manufacturing. Producing closer to the point of sale offers advantages: shorter lead times, simpler logistics, and fewer compliance risks. And as tariffs narrow the cost gap, domestic production becomes more competitive. That said, most companies aren't moving away from global sourcing entirely. Instead, they're building multi-country supply networks that allow them to respond more quickly when policies change. Executives across the category are describing today's environment as far more complex than it was even 5 years ago. But that complexity is also driving innovation, particularly in areas like adjustable bases and integrated sleep systems. Now, let's talk about the consumer, because while supply chains are shifting, demand is still a bit of a mixed picture. Recent data shows that consumer sentiment has improved slightly. About half of consumers now say their financial situation is good or very good, which is up from earlier this year. And just over 40% say they feel comfortable making discretionary purchases. But that doesn't mean spending is back in a big way. Nearly a third of consumers say they're still spending less overall. Many are focusing on cost-saving behaviors, cooking at home, shopping sales, using discounts wherever they can. Looking ahead, most consumers expect things to stay about the same over the next year, with only a small percentage expecting real improvement. For furniture retailers, that creates a challenging environment. You've got stable demand, but it's cautious. That puts pressure on pricing strategies, especially in entry-level categories where customers are more sensitive. And finally today, let's touch on how the path to purchase continues to evolve, particularly online. One of the most important shifts is that fewer shoppers are arriving with a specific product in mind. Only about 40% of customers now come to a website knowing exactly what they want. The majority are browsing, researching, and comparing options across multiple visits and devices before making a decision. Younger consumers, especially, are taking longer. It's not uncommon for items to sit in a cart for days before a purchase is completed, and price sensitivity is driving shoppers to switch between retailers frequently. What this means is that the traditional linear sales funnel is becoming less relevant. The buying journey is longer, less predictable, and more fragmented. For furniture companies, it reinforces the importance of showing up earlier in the process, during that research and inspiration phase, and staying visible throughout the journey. Whether that's through content, retargeting, or simply making it easier for customers to return and pick up where they left off, the goal is to remain part of the consideration set until they're ready to buy. So when you step back and look at everything together, from tariffs and sourcing shifts to design trends and consumer behavior, it's clear that the industry is operating in a more complex environment than it has in years. But within that complexity, there are also opportunities. Companies that can stay flexible, diversify intelligently, and connect with customers earlier in their journey are going to be in a stronger position moving forward. That's it for today's update. If you found this helpful, be sure to subscribe so you can stay in the loop on what's happening across the furniture industry.